you. So we'd love to start by asking about your journey. So, Mr. Zubrin, could you tell us a bit more about yourself?
Well, sure. Um, I'm 73, so I was 5 when Sputnik flew, the first satellite. And while to the adults, Sputnik may have been scary, to me as a little kid who was already reading science fiction, it was great because it meant that space travel was going to be real. And so I got totally into it. And my parents encouraged my interest. You know, my dad bought me a telescope to do drawings of the moon through the eyepiece. We launched model rockets, and I read all the science I could. And it rapidly became clear to me that Mars was really the place we needed to go. Mars is where the science was, it's where we might find life, and it's where people might settle. Um, and in the 60s, this was going to happen. I mean, it was going to happen soon. We were going to be on the moon by 1970, on Mars by 1980, Saturn by 1990, Alpha Centauri by the year 2000. This is what the future was going to look like. And of course, only the very first step of that plan actually happened. We did make it to moon, in fact, before 1970. We made it by 1969. But and NASA did have a plan to get to Mars by 1981, but Nixon canceled it, the president. And so I got off the space track for a while because of that. I became a science teacher. But after a number of years doing that, I decided, look, you know, that's not what I wanted to be when I was a kid. When I was 12, I didn't want to be a science teacher. I wanted to be a space explorer. And so this was not, I wasn't going to settle. And so I went back to graduate school and became an engineer, an astronautical engineer, and eventually got a job doing preliminary design of Mars missions for Martin Marietta, which is a company that later became Lockheed Martin, which is today the biggest aerospace company. Um, and so and while there, I was responsible for coming up with a new concept for human Mars missions, which was the Mars Direct plan. And that got me well known. And then I wrote a book on it, which was successful, The Case for Mars. And I became very well known. And I used that platform to help call into being the Mars Society to help try
Okay.
to make this really happen.
Awesome. Okay. Well, speaking about your book, The Case for Mars, what specifically inspired you to write The Case for Mars?
Well, what it was this, the way it worked out was the following. Uh, I proposed Mars Direct in 1990. By 1993, NASA had looked into it and done revised their Mars mission plan based on embracing Mars Direct. And then the same people who had costed the 90-day report, which was the previous plan, they had costed humans to Mars at $400 billion. They costed doing it this way at 55. And so that was almost a factor of 8 cost reduction. And word of that leaked out, and Newsweek in 1994, on the 25th anniversary of the moon landing, decided to make it their cover story. You know, it's 25 years since we landed on the moon. What's next, Mars? And now there's a plan to how we could really do it. And I was heavily featured in that story. And so I'm sitting at my desk at the Martin Company one day, and the phone rings, and I pick it up, and and the person says, "Hi, I'm Laurie Fox. I'm a literary agent. Have you ever thought about writing a book?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I wrote a book once. It never got published." And they say, "What was it?" I said, "It was a spy novel." And she said, "Well, were you ever a spy?" I said, "No." Did you have a literary agent working with you? No. Well, you are an astronautical engineer, and I am a literary agent. And if you write a book about your plan, I will get it published. So I wrote The Case for Mars, and we did get it published with the Free Press, which is a subdivision of Simon and Schuster, one of the major New York publishers, and it was very successful. The first printing of 18,000 copies sold out inside of 2 weeks, and but and then more and more printings, and eventually over 150,000 copies were sold, and um, and then foreign editions as well. Uh, but what's fun about that, and I wish I had saved them, was publisher after publisher rejected the manuscript.
Mhm.
Okay, 40 publishers rejected it before we got to the one that accepted it. And
Wow.
I wish I had saved the rejection letters because they were all very pompous. Who would ever want to read a book about how to send humans to Mars? There's no audience for this. Thank you very much. Doesn't fit in with our plans. And then the Free Press went for it, and it was a terrific success. Uh, so the lesson there is you got to keep trying.
Yeah. Okay. Well, the biggest question with our audience is why do you believe Mars should be the next frontier instead of like the moon or somewhere else?
Because Mars is where the science is, it's where the challenge is, and it's where the future is. It's where the science is because it's the key to letting us know the truth about the potential prevalence and diversity of life in the universe. It's where the challenge is because it's the challenge. I mean, how many young people your age? I mean, maybe a few. Obviously, you're interested in space, but the spirit of youth is to want to do things that have never been done before, not to do things that their grandparents did.
That's right.
Um, and so, uh, if we're going to inspire the next generation, we need to take on a challenge that hasn't been done before. Okay, and that's Mars, not the moon. Um, and I mean, and then finally, it's where the future is. Mars has the materials needed to support life and therefore civilization in a way that the moon just doesn't. The moon has hardly any water, it has no carbon, it has no nitrogen. These are the elements needed for life. The Mars has plenty of them. And one could go on about how Mars has more of everything that you would need and the moon generally doesn't. And so while Mars is obviously much further away than the moon, the fact that something is close doesn't mean you can settle there. Uh, nobody's talking about settling the stratosphere, and that's 30 miles away. The it's right above you, and you know, uh, and uh, so Mars compares to the moon as North America compared to Greenland during the age of European sea exploration. Okay, Greenland's closer to Europe. Europeans did reach it before they reached America, but you couldn't really settle there, whereas in North America you could.
Okay. All right. So now, okay, that's okay, that makes sense, but let's talk more about how we can get to Mars with like the Mars Direct plan. So, like what is the core philosophy behind the Mars Direct plan and how does it differ from like the current NASA plans?
Okay, well, um, the core philosophy of the Mars Direct plan is travel light and live off the land. Okay, that is the reason why we're interested in going to Mars is because it has the materials needed to support life and civilization, and therefore make use of those materials. So the key to the Mars Direct plan, I mean, the way the plan works is first you launch your Earth return vehicle to Mars, and it makes its return propellant out of carbon dioxide and water. It makes methane oxygen propellant. And then once that's done, then you launch the crew out to Mars in a HAB module. And they fly out to Mars in that, land on Mars in that, use it as their house on Mars. And then at the end of the mission, they fly back to Earth in the Earth return vehicle, leaving their habitation module on Mars. So each time you do this, you add another HAB to the base. And before you know it, you got the beginning of the first human settlement on a new world. This compares to the conventional Mars mission plan, which was originally designed by Wernher von Braun, which involve constructing a giant spaceship in low Earth orbit, fully loaded with all the propellant it would need to go to Mars and back, and then fly out from there to Mars orbit, land in a little landing craft, explore for a short period of time, and go back up to the mothership and then return to Earth. So these are two different approaches. One involves massive on orbit assembly, the other involves using Martian resources to avoid doing that. And but you see, you're going to have to use Martian resources if you ever want to settle Mars. We're not going to supply a Mars city with food from the Earth. Okay, uh, so environment becomes habitable for you if you can turn the materials there into resources. See, there's no such thing as a natural resource. There's only natural materials. And it's what's in your mind, what's in your skill set that turns it into materials. If you're stranded out in the wilderness by the side of a lake, um, you could starve to death, or you could figure out how to make a net and catch fish. Um, and the fish are only a resource if you know how to create the technology to catch them.
Yeah, you're right. So, so what technological barriers still are in place that are affecting us from getting to Mars?
Well, you know, it's not so much a technological barrier as it is that required hardware isn't built. That is, all the technologies needed to send humans to Mars exist, and in fact have existed for 40 years at least. The so we're not talking about something like inventing the atom bomb in Los Alamos in World War II, where they're
Yeah.
exploring into new worlds of physics. Okay, here we're talking about basic engineering, creating certain flight systems. And we know how to build rocket engines, we know how to build life support systems, and it's a question of engineering it and doing it. It's not a fundamental problem. And in a way, it is surprising, even shocking, that we haven't been to Mars already. Because, I mean, look, I was just about your age when we landed on the moon.
Yep.
And if anyone had told me then that I'd be 73 years old and we wouldn't have cities on the moon and Mars, I would have thought they were crazy.
Yeah. Okay, so if you did have control over NASA's like next year, 10 years of Mars planning, what would you do differently and what would you change or like prioritize, for example?
Well, okay. So look, Elon Musk is a big Mars proponent and he's in a position of power right now and will probably get a Mars program launched. But I don't think his idea that the first thing we're going to do is build a city on Mars and send 1 million people there so that there'll be a city on Mars after Earth is destroyed. First of all, I don't think it's possible. And second of all, I think that most people would not support such a program. Okay. The And what I would do is I would first use the Starship, and I think this could be done within 4 years, that is launch in 2028, a Starship mission to Mars, one way, no people, but just lots of robots in it, like maybe 15 Curiosity-sized Mars rovers and 15 helicopters, and not little tiny ones like Ingenuity, but bigger ones, each carrying 5 or 6 instruments, so that they could go out, fly out, explore all over the place, bring samples back to the base, and inside the Starship, we can have a well-equipped lab with lots of instruments to look at all the different samples that are brought by the rovers and the helicopters. In other words, a robotic expedition. Um, and in this way, uh, convince the science community that these new capabilities that are being developed to enable the human exploration of Mars, namely not only heavy lift, but heavy payload delivery, can be used to greatly expand the scientific exploration of Mars. Okay. And that will win them over, and maybe do another such mission in 2031, and then finally send people in 2033. And by this time, we've now had a lot of experience with starships and refueling them and landing them, so it'll be safe.
Yeah.
Um, so that's how I would do it. I think we can get to Mars in 8 years by approaching it that way, and um, get a great amount of scientific uh, exploration done along the way. To
Okay.
say nothing of what we do after we have people there.
Yeah. All right. So, a lot of people oppose it. So, how do you respond to the people that say that Mars settlement is like too risky or too expensive?
Well, yeah, here's the thing. Uh, well, first of all, I don't think that the government should do a Mars settlement program. I
Okay.
believe the government should do a Mars exploration program, okay, and including up to and including human exploration. I think that should be done. I think human explorers can do 1,000 times more exploration than robotic rovers and such. The and so this is the immediate public good. I think, though, that by developing these systems that can support the exploration of Mars, um, we will create the technological base, the technological capability that will allow people to choose to settle Mars on their own. Uh, I mean, look, you see, for example, Starship is going to be reusable. And you can bet that if Starship is successful, the Chinese are going to copy it. So there'll be a Chinese copy of Starship, and maybe other companies will have their own version of this kind of thing. So there'll be half a dozen different kinds of starships that people will be making and flying. And here's the thing about reusable launch vehicles that most people haven't thought about, which is if when launch vehicles become reusable, there's going to be something else existing in the world that hasn't existed up till now. And that is used launch vehicles. Okay. You know, um, most people can't afford a new car, but a lot of those people who can't afford a new car have cars. Why? How? Because they bought a used car, which you can get for as little as 1/10 the cost of a new car. Okay. And that's why a lot of people who could not remotely afford the cost of a new car have a car. Okay. And it's going to be the same with rockets. Okay. Uh, Musk told me that he could build a Starship, that is the upper stage, the part that would actually go to Mars, for $10 million, which means that either he or one of the copycats would probably be willing to sell them for $20 million. And well, so they sell them new for $20 million. And that means sooner or later, someone's going to be able to buy a used one for $2 million. And if they could really transport 100 people to Mars, $2 million divided by 100 people is $20,000 each. That's an amount of money that a fair number of people could afford if they want to actually move somewhere. Okay. And it's much less cost relative to income than, for instance, it cost people to travel to America in the 1700s. And the so what I'm saying is we enable and do the scientific exploration of Mars. And in the course of doing that, we were developing the technologies that will allow people to decide on their own to try to settle Mars. And they'll take a risk, but people have a right to take their own risks.
Okay. So, for our younger people out there, what advice do you have for like high school or college students that like are hoping to contribute to Mars missions in the future?
Well, in terms of the immediate period ahead, the people who will get a chance to participate in this are, first of all, engineers,
Yep.
including not only aerospace engineers, although that's right on target, but other mechanical and electrical engineers uh, are also very much needed for the space program. Um, to some extent, chemical engineers. Um, the so there's that, and then there's also natural scientists, geologists, for example, um, will be needed for Mars exploration. So you might say, if taking part in space exploration is your passion, the number one choice is engineering. Uh, and the number two choice would be natural science, including geology, microbiology, even astronomy, so forth.
Okay. So what types of skills or mindsets are valuable for future aerospace engineers or just engineers in general?
Well, here's the thing. I once asked a very famous engineer uh, named Rickover. He was the person who created the first nuclear submarine. Uh, what he thought was the most important character trait an engineer needed to have. And he answered me by saying courage. Courage. And now, by that, he didn't mean the courage to try to storm a machine gun nest. What he meant was the courage to speak the truth, regardless of whether it is the popular opinion, whether it's the team opinion. In other words, you can have a successful engineering career by being a team player. And it's probably a good idea in your first job interview to get your first engineering job to say that you're a team player. But if you actually want to be an engineer who does something that matters, your commitment has to be to the truth. Okay. That is, if you think something is a bad idea and you have solid engineering reasons that shows why it's not a good idea, you need to make the case, even if the team leader doesn't want to hear it. Because that's what engineering is about. Engineering is about truth. It's about moral courage.
Okay. Mr.
And
Zubrin.
by the way, this is true in a lot of professions. I just read a book,
Yeah.
uh, and it was a book about a famous Air Force officer. And uh, at some point in his career, someone told him, look, you can either be someone or you can do something. You can play along with the crowd and you'll get promoted, or you can take a stand for the ideas you think are correct and you probably won't get promoted, but you will do something that matters.
Okay. So if you could go back and talk to your 17-year-old self, what would you say to your 17-year-old self?
Well, uh, I would say to my 17-year-old self, and especially even more to my 19-year-old self, and
Okay.
I'll tell you the difference because my 17-year-old self was in high school and my 19-year-old self was in college. And my 17-year-old self still wanted to be a space explorer. And my 19-year-old self was, okay, now I'm in college and I realized that being a space explorer is like trying to be a movie star. It's something that the people, as it were, on the other side of the TV screen do. Okay. That is, people you see on TV, they do stuff like that. People on our side of the TV screen have jobs like teachers and maybe lawyers, policemen, you name it, the kind of people that you meet every day. That's the people, and so choose one of those jobs, get real. And I chose science teacher. But what I would say to that person is no, no, no. The people on the other side of the TV screen were once on your side of the TV screen. Every one of them. Every person who is now an astronaut was once a high school student wondering what he was going to be. And, nobody was born an astronaut. No one was born an aerospace engineer. Now, it is true that being an astronaut is, a one in a million kind of thing. I mean, so there's a large element of luck involved in getting into that position. But anyone who wants to participate in the space program, say as an engineer or a scientist, can, if they simply do the work. They go take the classes, they become an aerospace engineer, or even a mechanical or electrical engineer or a planetary scientist, and then, you know, do the work and you will get there. That's what I would say. So I took a detour in my life um, for, well, basically 9 years after I graduated college. Um, I was doing other stuff, and then I went back to graduate school, and then I became an engineer. Now, it's true that actually that being a teacher taught me some things and perhaps enabled me to how to um, present convincing arguments to engineering audiences by making it clear. Um, the but nevertheless, so it wasn't a totally useless period of time, but it was a bit off the track, and I'm glad that very glad. Okay, the most important decision I made was at the age of 31 saying, no, this isn't what I signed up for. Okay, being a teacher in a high school. It's a fine profession. It's a noble profession. It's a necessary profession, but it's not what I wanted to be when I was 10 or 17. And and if you want to be what you want to be now, you have to say that's what I'm going to be.
Yeah. Okay, that's great advice, Mr. Zubrin. So for our final question, how can students or people or younger people get involved with the Mars Society or even it's just educational outreach programs or get educated?
Well, first of all, if you want to come to our convention, it's going to be in Los Angeles in October 9th through 11th at the University of Southern California. There's a greatly reduced student rate. You could also go to the Mars Society website, in which is at www.marssociety.org, and look to see if there's a chapter, Mars Society chapter where you live. Where do you live?
Dallas Fort Worth area.
We have a Mars Society chapter in Dallas Fort Worth area. And you could contact them and say, hi, what are you guys doing? And they'll tell you, well, we're trying to organize visits to congressmen to oppose the cuts in the NASA space science budget, which is actually what we're doing, because the Trump administration has proposed to cut the NASA space science budget in half. And and there's no reason why high school students can't participate in those meetings with congressmen. In fact, in certain ways, you're among the most effective people to bring to such a meeting because they see the voices of youth. They see what is being expected of them by the next generation. And they know that you're not doing this because you're some fancy paid lobbyist for some aerospace company, that you're doing this because you believe in it. And so, sure, you can do that. And then we also have a program called the Mars Ambassadors that go to classrooms and other places and talk about humans to Mars or life on Mars or similar subjects and spread the vision that way. And we also, well, when you're in college, we have what they call the University Rover Challenge, in which teams of college students build Mars rovers and we compete them doing exploration in the desert.
Wow. Okay. All right. Well, okay. I'm definitely gonna link that for the article that I'm writing and put in the podcast. But yeah, so yeah, I guess you've answered most of my questions. So I'm very glad I got to speak with you today, Mr. Zubin. You got
Well, I'm
anything else?
happy to have spoken to you.
Yeah.
And good luck, Vince. And